Big announcement has been made this week regarding UK election laws.
Jafar, he's delighted too.
Ecstatic.
Electoral reform is one of my top personal issues for me. But don't get too excited, guys. If, like me, you are a big supporter of proportional representation, then I'm afraid this isn't the news for you. We're still going to have to park it for that bit.
Disappointed!
However, the UK Labour government has announced plans to extend voting rights for 16 and 17-year-olds. I'm going to offer my 2 cents on this and what this could mean for future elections. But first, if you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to stay notified. So, as you can see with these greys here, I am not a young person. I've long given up that badge for some time now. But I've long held this strong belief that if a 16 to 17-year-old can be able to go out in the workplace and pay taxes to the state, then why can't there be stakeholders in that and be able to shape our politics? It also needs reminding that 16 to 17-year-olds can also join the army. So it's always nice small victory when Labour adopts a Lib Dem idea, and this isn't me being petty. My first entry into politics was in 2005. When that was kicking around. And I can remember it being in a Lib Dem manifesto, and it had been in future manifestos since then. But we were also the first mainstream party to adopt this idea and to have it as a platform. But, if I can be honest with myself, I wasn't entirely confident that when it was announced by both Labour and the Lib Dems manifesto in the last election that this would get adopted. After all, I had seen Labour repeat these lines when they ran for re-election in 2005 and in 2010, and it never got implemented. And then it was in the Lib Dems 2010 manifesto, but when they joined the coalition, it too never got implemented. Although, I would say we were handicapped by our Tory partners who were always set against it. So, Andy, you might say, this sounds like a complete no-brainer. What's the problem? Well, you'd be surprised how many people took up on social media to cry out how outlandish they think this is. Their first argument is that young people shouldn't be able to have the vote because they are not informed or mature enough to vote in elections. Now, as someone who likes history, it sounds awfully like the argument that those men in those high castles who had their head in their heads in the sherry were making against having women the vote. Honestly, if you look at what people have wrote on social media and compare that to what they've written at those times, you can see the connection in the language they were being used during the suffragette movement. I just find it a weak argument, because being real here, I think you can find someone of any age who are so pig-headed and ill-informed on politics. There's no test for political awareness when you walk into polling booths, and rightly so. Democracy doesn't require perfection. It requires participation. Just a quick comment here. There was this one right-wing Tory commentator's post, who I won't name, who tried to make politics over the age thing by saying, oh well, I don't think young people should have the vote because I used to be a Corbyn supporter. Well, if that's the case then, my political intelligence must have taken a massive dip, because when I discovered politics, I started off as a Tory. I just found it a very odd comment.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Another argument they try to present is that because young people, in their eyes, are so ill-informed and ill-equipped when it comes to politics, that it might actually make them vote for extremist parties. Which, again, I know many older people who vote for extremist parties, or even like crazy parties like the Monster Raving Loony Party, but again, I just think it's a very weak argument that they should be making. And it doesn't really help that Nigel Farage, he actually had concerns about this as well. In fact, he was calling it Labour trying to rig the election in favour of them, because most polls show, despite what some polls have been trying to tell that story about reform getting more younger voter, Labour still have a good sizable block of young people who would vote for them in elections. Now, again, people's politics changed. My politics has certainly changed over time. So I just think it's a redundant argument, really. We shouldn't really be bracketing people as just being into one tribe, really. And And again, if Nigel Farage is concerned about extending the franchise of voting for 16 to 17-year-olds, then I think it pretty much debunks the myth that they are going towards more extreme parties. And like I said, anyone of any age can vote for silly extremist parties or not very informed on it. You know, like I said, we don't have a political test when they go to the polling booths. So I can't understand it. And for Farage to actually use language like that to say that Labour are trying to rig the election against them, I just think is very dangerous personally. I don't know. I mean, Farage for me, like my issue with Farage is that, you know, he always likes to plant seeds when it comes to things. He doesn't start the fire, but he's got the matches ready for you. So I just don't think that is very helpful and actually quite dangerous language to say that Labour are going to try and hijack the election. You know, they're not hijacking the election. And Farage, if you're concerned about 16 to 17-year-olds not going to vote for your party, then you need to engage with them. That's on you. That's on Reform. That isn't on, you know, that isn't on Labour. That's on your guys to try and solve. Besides, we want young people to engage in politics. We moan when they don't turn up to vote, and yet when they ask to be part of the process early, we tell them to wait their turn. And also, we have so many young people who just feel so disengaged and feel like politicians don't listen to them. And maybe by extending that franchise, getting their concerns early, maybe that will make such a big difference. And I just don't think you can have it both ways. Giving them the vote isn't about fairness. It's about building a stronger, healthier democracy for our future. And Luke, we've seen this work. Scotland gave 16 to 17-year-olds the vote for their independence referendum back in 2014, and they kept it for the Hollywood elections. And what happened? They turned out, they engaged, they debated. It's a myth that young people aren't interested in politics. They're interested when they feel like those voices count. And I'll just say briefly, what could this mean for future elections? So, it is true that 16 to 17-year-olds do heavily vote for more progressive parties such as Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, and that the Reform and Conservative vote is actually quite depressed. Do I think that extending the franchise is going to change the shape of politics? No, I don't. I don't think so. We already struggle when it comes to young people now to go out and vote. There's actually quite a depressed turnout for people who are under 25. So I don't really know why Reform are so concerned about this, and also the Conservatives, because the Conservatives have also had complaints and actually put in an emergency question when Labour introduced the bill in the Commons. Because some background here, guys, Labour introduced the bill because they wanted to introduce it before the summer recess. So the Conservatives put a motion of questions in order to try and, I guess, delay the bill. I don't really know how the structures of Parliament work. I'm not very brushed up on parliamentary procedure. But do I think it will actually change the outcome of the elections? No, I don't think so. But maybe in future elections it can do, because, like I said, I feel like a lot of young people get ignored when it comes to their views and their voices, when it comes to things like housing, when it comes to things like job security, when it comes to things like being able to access benefits, because there's some benefits you can't access until you're 21. I think some, it's even as high as 25. So I think a lot of young people get really locked out when it comes to politics. And I don't think changing the electoral system, not the electoral system, that's what I want, but it's not going to happen.
That is so fetch.
Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
Changing the voting age is actually going to change things, because the change actually needs to come from politicians themselves to actually offer a real voice for young people. So, you know, until that changes, I still think we are going to get quite depressed turnout when it comes to young people. So, but maybe by extending the age from 16 to 17, we'll get people to be a bit more engaged and more involved when it comes to politics. So, who knows? But that's my thoughts on the whole. Will this actually change the outcome of politics? So my short answer is no, I don't think it will, and I think the Reform and the Conservatives are just being a little bit petty, if I'm being really, really honest with them. So no, I don't think it will. You know, the change has to come from politicians. So while this isn't the big sweeping reform I'd like to see, proportional representation, this is a step forward. It's a small win for democracy, and we should take those wherever we can. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like and subscribe and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your views on the vote of 16 to 17-year-olds and whether you think this could change the shape of future elections. Until next time, let's keep the conversation going.